Hi, I'm Dr. Jason Siegel, and welcome to Neuro Now. In the summer between my 8th and ninth grade years in school, I would ride my bike about a mile to mow my aunt's yard. One day I was riding home and I was hit from behind by a minivan. I remember the sound of the collision of the van on the back of my bike. I remember the feeling of elevation as I was going into the air. I remember seeing the ground as I was falling, and I remember getting up with a tremendous headache and just this intense urge to fall asleep. I had put a nice dent in the hood of the van. I was 14 years old and not very bright, so I was not wearing a helmet, but yet I still put a nice crack in the windshield with my head. The cop came, took me home, took my bike home, and I just, I was like, really feel like I need to fall asleep. The cop told me don't do that because if you do, you might die. So my mom took me to the emergency room. I got a head CT. Was seen by the doctor. Everything was negative. I was reassured that if I took a nap, I would not die. And as soon as I got in the car, I was out. When I woke up, hours later, my headache was gone. I was feeling back to normal, thankfully, um, and I haven't had any issues since then. Now, I can't say that this experience motivated me to become a neurologist or motivated me to become a specialist in brain injuries, but I do think about it very often when I'm treating my traumatic brain injury patients. We had a lot of questions. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't know how about head injuries. We didn't know what the cop was saying when he said I might die if I fell asleep, and where does that even come from? So what I want to do with this video and the next in this series is go over some of the basics of traumatic brain injury, or TBI. With this video and subsequent videos, I'm going to talk about what traumatic brain injury is, what concussions are, the symptoms, the diagnoses, how we treat them, and how people recover, among many other topics. So I could probably talk for a long time, boring you with a long video on traumatic brain injury. So I'm going to take it bite by bite, and starting with our first installment today. So without further ado, part one: traumatic brain injury, the basics. So what is a traumatic brain injury? A traumatic brain injury, or a TBI, is actually quite simple. It's any time a physical injury to the head causes abnormal brain function. Now, this physical injury to the brain could be a blunt force, it could be a blow, a jolt, it could be a penetrating injury, like a gunshot or a stab. It can be shock waves coming from an explosion, or it could even be whiplash injury from too much force and torque on the head and neck. All of these things can cause a disruption of how the brain works on many different levels. So why does a traumatic brain injury even occur? Well, there's a lot of biochemical reasons that we're still trying to figure out about why that physical injury causes a functional disruption in normal brain activity. I think intuitively it makes sense. If you hit anything hard enough, it's probably not going to work right. But on a cellular level, there's a lot that goes on after you have a traumatic injury where that physical force transmits an adverse consequence on the brain, which causes problems with the neurons, chemical imbalances, neurotransmitter imbalances, inflammation, and all these things we're really starting to scratch the surface of understanding. So as you can see, your brain is a very complex system which utilizes many different subsystems to function, and any of these subsystems can become damaged, which is why we see such a variety of symptoms after a traumatic brain injury. Sometimes people have headaches or dizziness or confusion, or worse, more focal neurological problems. So if your brain runs through a complex series of systems, and any of those systems can be injured during a traumatic brain injury, how in the heck do we define traumatic brain injury? How do we grade it or characterize it or talk about it or study it or treat it? Well, unfortunately, there's not one universally used definition of a traumatic brain injury in the sense that really encompasses all the cellular and clinical and radiographic findings after traumatic brain injury. The most commonly used system uses a combination of clinical and radiographic factors. So relies on how long and how bad somebody had lost consciousness or had altered consciousness. How long did somebody have amnesia or memory problems? And were there any abnormal radiographic findings like on a CT or something? So we use a combination of these factors to grade traumatic brain injury into mild, moderate, and severe. Through the course of the next few videos, I'm going to be referring to mild, moderate, and severe by this definition uh, based on the characteristics you see on the screen now. So how big of a problem is traumatic brain injury? It's estimated that anywhere between 1.5 and 3 million people a year suffer from a traumatic brain injury. I grew up in Indiana. I live in Florida now. This is about the population of both Indianapolis and Jacksonville combined every year suffering a TBI. TBI accounts for 300,000 hospitalizations a year. And in 2020, there were over 64,000 TBI related deaths. About half of all TBI related hospitalizations are from falls, and the most common cause of death from a TBI is a self inflicted gunshot wound. Although anyone can suffer a traumatic brain injury, there are some who are at higher risk. These include service members and veterans, racial and ethnic minorities, people who experience homelessness, people in correctional or detention facilities, survivors of intimate partner violence, people living in rural areas, and older adults. In fact, older adults are more likely to be hospitalized and die from a traumatic brain injury compared to all other age groups. And this is tough because their symptoms are often missed because they mimic other symptoms that older people can have, like fatigue or memory problems or headaches. In 2019, about 50% of all high school students reported some kind of uh, sport related or recreational related traumatic brain injury in the previous year. TBI is considered the signature injury from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Between 2000 and 2016, over 360,000 U.S. service members were diagnosed with TBIs. It's about 66 per day. Finally, the CDC estimates the economic impact of TBIs to be about $56 billion a year with a B, with about $17 billion of that being from concussions. So I hope I've piqued your interest about traumatic brain injury. Maybe you're just interested in learning more. Maybe you know somebody who has suffered a TBI, or maybe you yourself had rode a bike when you were 14 without a helmet. Regardless, I'm going to be putting up more videos. If you like what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. Please leave comments or questions down below. I'll try to answer them. I'll also have links to a lot of my references in the description. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you next time.